Hello. How was your lunch? Yeah, was it good? Awesome. Yeah. For some people, it was better than my talk, but I'm grateful that you came here, even though the break was very short. Okay, let's start. How should I implement a new feature in my Rails app? This is like a common question, and the answer, there is a gem for that. And I really hate this approach. I hate when someone suggests this answer at the beginning. And the title of this talk is Responsible Gem Collector, and I'm going to talk about picking the dependencies for your applications in a more wise way with a long-term perspective in mind. So I'm a freelancer. I have my own company. I'm probably my rates are probably lower than Andy's rate, so you can hire me instead. You can find me on Twitter. I also have my own blog, so I encourage you to check this out. And here's another sentence which is commonly heard. Rails is great for prototyping. And I agree with it. If you want to build a prototype, Rails is awesome. There's no doubt about that. But I have to confess to something. In my life, I've never prototyped anything. If you define a prototype as a project where, like at the beginning of the project, you know that after 2 months, we are going to throw this whole code away, then for me, this is a prototype. But my experience is different. My clients expect me to build something pretty quickly, but then they validate the idea, and if it's successful, they don't want to throw anything away. It's just my observation that clients who pay for the code, they don't want to throw this code away. So my experience is about building something quickly, but as well thinking about what will happen next, about the long-term perspective, let's say 5 years. Like thinking how this application will look like after 5 years. And this talk is all about examples. I will have lots of code examples, and I will show some gems. But the takeaway of this talk is like not limited to these gems. Use this one, don't use this one. I hope I will manage to show some patterns based on these gems. And a very, very important thing for you to understand, I'm really grateful for all the gem maintainers. They do awesome work. I will present some good patterns, but also some bad patterns. That this doesn't mean that a gem is bad. This means that I believe that it's not as useful from this long-term perspective. It's maybe more useful from this short-term perspective, but I'm just going to focus on this long-term perspective. So let's start with Paranoia gem, which changes the way how records are deleted, destroyed in your Rails application. So when you introduce this gem to your code base and you have a client model and you call client.destroy on it, it's not really destroyed. And you have to call client.reallyDestroy to make it disappear from a database. So now the method name lies. People who look at the code are accustomed to the fact that when you call destroy, it disappears from the database. But this is no longer the case. The method name stayed the same, but the behavior changed. So this is quite surprising, and this is especially surprising for new people who join your project, because they have to learn that destroy is no longer destroy, it's something else. And if we take a look into the code base of this gem, how it works under the hood, we will learn that it applies a default scope to hide the records which are which were previously destroyed from the user. And this default scope has many disadvantages because it's really a default. It's a default for associations, so you have to do some crazy tricks to make it work in other places of your code base. And if you think about this, in your application, there are many places where you would like to have really all the records presented, not only these which are visible, but like really all of them. So let's say this could be an admin panel. Probably you want the admin user to be able to see also the records which were deleted. So you have to unapply this default scope, and if you unapply this default scope, so what's the reason for making this default? It doesn't make sense. It's better to introduce some named scope and explicitly call it whenever you want only the visible records. Okay, let's move to a next gem. RubyC, probably less popular. It's a gem which maps your database identifiers to some bigger numbers for presenting them in your URLs. For instance, if you want to present your application to your investors, you don't want them to be aware that you have like 10 users, and it's easy to guess by looking at the ID. So this gem changes this behavior and a bit hides messes up the IDs. So in order to integrate it, you have to just like put a single line of code into your model, and that's it. But if we just try to learn how it works, we will see that it overrides the find method. So it overrides find method from active record base. So it takes its own logic and like prepends it to the implementation, and then calls super on it to invoke the default behavior. And this has some disadvantages, because now we introduce coupling between these two gems, because this RubyC gem has to obey the interface from active record find method. So whenever this active record find method implementation changes, there is a possibility that this gem will break, which means that when new version of active record comes out, you may not be able to upgrade it, because this gem, this RubyC gem, hooks and overrides this method. And you cannot upgrade active record, so you cannot upgrade Rails, and you stay at some older version, which really sucks. Okay, let's move to a next gem, which is like from the similar area, friendly ID, probably more popular. It also affects how your URLs are generated. It adds the concept of slugs, like the friendly representation for the URL. And originally, this gem worked in like exactly the same way as RubyC. So it was overriding the find method, so you could pass a string instead of ID to the find method, and it just searched for a record using this string slug instead of a numerical ID. But in the next versions, the maintainers of the gem decided that okay, we will introduce a friendly scope, and you have to call this find method on this friendly scope instead of like just the find method. And I think this is better. This is better because the behavior is changed only in this case, and it's easy to find places in your code base where the behavior is changed. So you can just search for all the places where you use this friendly scope, and these are the places where you use the gem. So instead of being like the global default, its behavior is limited to only a couple of places. Okay, And how is this slug, this friendly representation, generated? So when you add this gem, it adds before validation callback. So it's done like automatically somewhere under the hood. And this is the problem with callbacks. So if you add callbacks, you are not aware when some piece of code is executed. And this is bad because maybe you would like this slug to be generated only for like particular group of records. Maybe you want this slug to be generated only for published articles. Maybe you want this to happen as a part of your business flow. So you have a publication flow, and this slug is generated only after it completes. So it's not possible when you have callbacks. And let's see an example of a gem from a different area, but which I believe does solve this problem in a better way. This is a geocoder gem for which deals with geolocalization and translation of the string description, let's say like the address, the street number, the country name, into the set of geocoordinates, latitude and longitude. So here, in order to integrate this gem, we have to add geocoded by to our model code, but we also have to add this after validation callback. It's not part of the gem code base. It's just suggested in the README. So they don't do this for us. We have to do this on our own. And I believe this is a good thing, because we just can avoid doing this. We can skip this line, and we get this geocode method, which we can call whenever we want on our own. This can be done from a service object. This can be done from a background job, because this getting the this latitude and longitude involves a HTTP call, so it takes some time. So you probably don't want to do this like every time you save a model. So you can do this in a background job. So instead of relying on callbacks, you explicitly invoke the method. And this next wonderful example, which deals with callbacks, is Elasticsearch. So a full text search engine, and how to integrate it in a Rails application. So here we have two possible approaches, the easy approach and the simple approach. And this is great because the maintainers of the gem give us two distinct ways how to integrate Elasticsearch into our application. So the easy approach is Elasticsearch model, and here we just include two modules into our model, and that's it. We are done. We can call the class level method import to synchronize everything from the database to Elasticsearch. And what's more, whenever we update a record in the database, the changes are persisted to Elasticsearch automatically via these callbacks. And we also get this query interface as a class level method search on the directly on the class. But this has some limitations. Now we have a one-to-one mapping between our database model and Elasticsearch. So it's like we have something in the database, and we will have the very same thing in Elasticsearch. And also indexing in Elasticsearch involves a HTTP call again. So this takes time. So you probably don't want to do this every time. Maybe you would like to index your articles only when some criteria is met. Probably you want to do this from a background job. Probably you don't want to refresh the Elasticsearch every time. Maybe you want to do this like once an hour. So it's not possible with this approach based on callbacks. And here enters Elasticsearch persistence, the alternative, which is a simple approach. And here you define your repository class, and you define how the database model, how it should be serialized and deserialized to Elasticsearch document. And this is awesome because you may take like your database models and just merge them into one Elasticsearch document. So add some denormalization to your Elasticsearch index to make searching faster. And also, you have to. Nothing happens under the hood. You have to manually instantiate this repository and call save on it whenever you want to update the article. So you have a total control when it is performed. Nothing happens under the hood. You can put this in your background job and make this like the synchronization between database and Elasticsearch asynchronous. What is more, you can define your own methods inside the repository class. So you can define find by title method if it corresponds to your like business domain. And here in this find method, we encapsulate this query language of Elasticsearch. So this query language of Elasticsearch doesn't leak through like the whole code base. It's only here, only in this repository class, and this is awesome. So you can say that this full text search capabilities are separated. They are handled in this repository class. They don't leak outside, and you are explicit. Okay, let's talk about Paperclip and Carrier Wave. This is reason. This is the reason of many conflicts in the Ruby community. Which one is better? And I'm not going to like pick my side. I'm just going to show like one specific aspect which I think is interesting. Let's start with Paperclip. And here we add this has attached file call to our model, and this is the beginning. But then we have to deal with different versions of the image. We have to deal with some processing, maybe with saving to S3 and so on. So it becomes more bloated. We have more and more code in our model. We have plenty of code related to storing the attachments in the model code. And in Carrier Wave, we have a slightly different approach because it introduces the concept of uploader, which encapsulates the everything related to storing attachments. So instead of putting this whole code in your model code, you can do this in a separate uploader class. So it's still the same code. It's like the same amount of code, but the place is different. So in some way, it's separated. And this is good because models have too many responsibilities. If you think about that, just by inheriting from active record base, we get the behavior related to mapping between like attributes in the database and the attributes in our model. We get typecasting. We get the support for validations. We get the support for associations. This is just like too much logic to handle. Even if your model code is, if your model class is just like inherit from active record base, it's still quite bloated. So if we keep adding more and more code to our model, then it has like way too many responsibilities. And every move which aims to take this code out of the model is good. And if we speak about gems which encourage you to put a lot of code in your model, the state machines gem is a wonderful example. Here we define a state machine, which means we have a state attribute and a set of transitions between different states, and the logic when they should happen, when they shouldn't happen, what should happen before a transition, what should happen after a transition. But this whole code is placed inside your model, and I believe this is a bad idea, because this code is all about your business logic, and your business logic, your domain logic, is the most important part of your application. Everything else, like handling HTTP calls, handling database queries, it's like all the same in every application. But your domain is something which makes your application unique. So it's good when you express this domain, your business logic, in terms of your own classes, your own concepts. You introduce your own abstractions instead of relying on like some gems, because then you are limited to the API of this gem. You cannot do something which was not invented by the gem maintainers. So I encourage you to own your business logic. And okay, and now I want to present the gem, which I believe is wonderful from the point of view of migrating of it. So you can introduce this gem, but then smoothly migrate of it if you notice that you no longer need this one. So this gem is Pandit for handling authorization in your AS applications. So in Pandit, you have this policy concept, and policy encapsulates the logic related to whether some action should be permitted, whether user should be permitted to execute some action on given resource. So you define methods for each action with a question mark at the end. And as you can see, there is no trace of Pandit in this code example. So it's just like plain old Ruby object, no Pandit. We don't inherit from Pandit. We don't include any module from Pandit. It's just like regular class, our own class. And then in the controller code, we call the authorize method, passing the resource. So it resolves the correct policy based on the name of the model, and it calls the correct method on it based on the current action, and it takes user as a current user. But we can be more explicit. We can override this behavior and just be explicit. Say which method should be invoked. And what else? We can override the policy class for the given resource. So we may customize this. And if we want to check the authorization not in the controller context, but let's say in a background job, in a service object, I don't know where and why, but this is possible. We can call this policy method on the Pandit module, just passing the correct user and the correct model, and we get this policy object resolved for us, and we can manually call the appropriate method of it. And let's go one step further. Here we just manually instantiate our class and call the appropriate method on it. And here we, in like simple steps, we migrated off Pandit completely. We have these policy classes in our code base, but we can remove Pandit completely. It just gave us a suggestion for a nice structure, how we can handle authorization, and it helped us to do some boilerplate code in the controller, but if we feel like this, we can remove it completely. That's totally not a problem. And I believe this is really awesome. I love such gems. So which gems are safe? I believe that there are certain classes of gems which are safe. For instance, API wrappers. This is a lot of boilerplate code, which usually someone already wrote for us. So if you want to integrate with some API and there is a gem created by the owners, the company behind the API, it usually doesn't make sense to write your own code. Just use the API wrapper. In most cases, you are safe. The same thing with adapters for external services, like this Elasticsearch adapter or adapter for RabbitMQ, the message queue, or adapter for a database. Again, this is not magic. Everything is part of some specification. It's well defined, but this is a lot of code which has to be written, and this is not your business, the core of your business. So in general, if something is not the core of your business, for instance, you may want to output an Excel spreadsheet, like some kind of report, and if you don't want like anything fancy, just a plain Excel report, it probably doesn't make sense to create your own solution for that. You can just use something which was already done. So to recap the talk, don't delegate your business logic to gems. The business logic is an important part of your application, the unique part, and you want to express this business logic using your own concepts which you come up with. If you compose your business logic out of like a bunch of gems, you will have troubles with maintaining this. It never works. And whenever you can, invoke the library code explicitly. So if you can just like do some library dot and call some method, then probably you are safe because you are aware of what happens. You don't have like any callbacks invoked, any code run behind your back. Like you are the master of this code. You can find all the places where you use the given library, and later on refactor it. It does not introduce coupling. And what is also good, try to take a peek under the hood. Look into the code base of a given gem. Like not only on the number of the stars in GitHub, how popular it is, because sometimes the gems which are pretty popular have the crappy code base, and try to think which patterns are involved, like how this gem achieves what it does, and if you don't agree with how it works, then you probably don't want to have it in your code base. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
And do you have any questions?
Do you have any successful examples of convincing gem authors or maintainers to move more to explicit approach rather than implicitly? And how would you recommend to speak up and explain why it's bad for the gem maintainers?
Okay, so I have one example is that recently this paranoia gem, which I started with, they introduced an option to not use the default scope. So someone suggested this, and they added this as a default option. I guess it's the default is that it uses this default scope, but you can turn this off with some configuration option. So this is possible, but I agree that it happens like really rarely. I think when you just suggest such changes, they are quite big, so they are going to break a lot of code. That's why the gem maintainers are like reluctant to migrate such a thing. So yeah, you can look for some other gem or start your own. But I understand also like why they are reluctant, because if the gem is quite popular and used by many users, they are not. They don't want to like break a lot of existing code.
Thank you.